A true story from Chicago. I inherited $4.08 when my husband died. Thank God I kept it secret. Share this story if you believe elderly voices deserve to be heard. Like and subscribe to Her Light for more stories of resilience and justice. My name is Eleanor Catherine Walsh, and I am 68 years old. What I am about to tell you happened right here in Chicago, in a modest brick house on the south side where I thought I had found refuge after my husband's death. Instead, I found predators wearing the faces of family. When my beloved Robert passed away 2 years ago after 37 years of marriage, the silence in our little house became deafening. Pancreatic cancer took him in 4 months, swift and merciless. I remember the way his hand grew thinner in mine each day, how his voice became a whisper, how his eyes still sparkled with love even when his body was failing. The night he died, I held him close and promised I would find a way to keep going, to honor the life we had built together. I spent 6 months afterward setting 2 place settings out of habit, cooking his favorite beef stew with extra carrots the way he liked it, and leaving his reading glasses on the nightstand like he might need them for the morning crossword. The house felt enormous without his presence. Every creak of the floorboards, every settling sound in the walls reminded me that I was alone for the first time in nearly 4 decades. Robert had been my anchor, my partner in everything. He had wake up at 6 every morning, make us both coffee in the blue ceramic mugs his sister had given us for our 10th anniversary, and read me the interesting headlines from the Chicago Tribune while I prepared breakfast. He would kiss my forehead before leaving for work at the Postal Service, and I had watched him walk to his car, noting how his shoulders looked in his uniform, how he carried himself with quiet dignity. After his death, I found myself standing at the kitchen window each morning, at 7:15, watching for a car that would never pull into our driveway again. I would catch myself buying 2 pork chops at the grocery store, brewing too much coffee, saving the funny stories I had heard to tell someone who would never hear them. The grief was like a weight I carried in my chest, heavy and constant. My son Michael finally intervened on a rainy Thursday in March. I was in the backyard, trying to tend Robert's tomato garden with clumsy hands, when I heard his voice behind me. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone like this," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Why don't you come stay with us for a while? Victoria would love to have you." I looked up from the soil, wiping my muddy hands on my gardening apron. Michael stood there in his expensive suit, briefcase in hand, looking like he had stopped by on his way to somewhere more important. He was 42 now, successful in his accounting career, married to a woman who seemed to understand him in ways I never quite could. But in that moment, he looked like the little boy who used to help me plant marigolds along the fence. "I don't want to be a burden," I said, knowing even as I spoke that I was ready to accept his offer. The house had become a mausoleum of memories, and I was drowning in them. Victoria, my daughter-in-law, had always been polite enough during our brief encounters at family gatherings. She worked as a dental hygienist and kept their suburban Arlington Heights home immaculate. When Michael first brought her home 5 years ago, she had seemed genuinely interested in learning my recipes and hearing stories about Robert's service in Vietnam. She had asked thoughtful questions about our wedding, our early years together, the challenges of raising Michael as a single mother during Robert's deployment. "Of course, Eleanor," she said when they came to collect me the following Saturday, her arms wide for an embrace that smelled of expensive perfume and hairspray. "We have that lovely guest room upstairs. You can stay as long as you need." The guest room was beautiful, I had to admit. Victoria had decorated it in soft lavender and cream, with a comfortable queen bed, a reading chair by the window, and a small desk where I could write letters or pay bills. She had even had Michael bring up the television from their basement, so I could watch my evening programs in private. She helped me pack my photograph albums, Robert's favorite coffee mug, and the small quilted throw my mother had made for our first apartment. I remember thinking how fortunate Michael was to have married someone with such a generous heart, someone who would welcome an elderly woman into her pristine home without complaint. "I have cleared out half the closet for you," Victoria said, hanging up my dresses with care, "and I put fresh towels in the bathroom. The blue ones are yours." That first evening, she made a beautiful welcome dinner: roasted chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes with real butter, and green beans that weren't from a can. She had even bought vanilla ice cream for dessert, remembering that it was my favorite. We sat around their dining table, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was part of a family again. "This is delicious," I said, meaning it. "You are such a wonderful cook," Victoria beamed. "I am still learning. Maybe you can teach me some of your recipes?" Michael smiled, looking relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since Robert's funeral. "Mom makes the best apple pie in Illinois," he said. "She used to sell them at the church bake sales." "I would love to learn," Victoria said, reaching over to pat my hand. "We could make it a regular thing, cooking together. But generosity, I have learned, can be performed when there is an audience and withdrawn when the curtain falls." The first month was peaceful, almost idyllic. I helped with cooking and cleaning, grateful to feel useful again. I had wake up early, before Michael left for work, and have coffee ready when he came down for breakfast. I had pack his lunch sometimes, the way I used to when he was in high school. Victoria would join us, cheerful and chatty, discussing her patients at the dental office or plans for redecorating the living room. Victoria complimented my apple pie when I made it for Sunday dinner, and she actually did ask me to teach her my mother's recipe for Irish soda bread. We spent a pleasant afternoon in the kitchen, her hands learning to knead the dough the way my mother had taught me 60 years ago. "The secret is not to overwork it," I explained, guiding her hands, "just enough to bring it together." "You are such a good teacher," she said, smiling. "I can see where Michael gets his patience." Michael seemed more relaxed having me there, and I felt like I was contributing to their household in meaningful ways. I would dust the furniture, organize the pantry, and keep the laundry folded. It felt good to be needed again, to have purpose beyond grief. Then small things began to change, so subtly I almost didn't notice at first. My herbal tea collection disappeared from the kitchen counter one day. "Oh, I moved those to the top shelf," Victoria explained when I asked. "We are reorganizing for better flow." But the shelf was too high for me to reach without a stepladder, and when I asked Michael to get them down, he was always too busy or forgot. Next, Victoria suggested I take over more of the daily housework. "Since you are here anyway, and I am working full-time," she said with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It would be such a help." I didn't mind initially. I had been caring for homes my entire adult life, and I took pride in keeping things neat and clean. But gradually, the requests became demands. I was expected to have dinner ready when they got home from work, to keep the house spotless, to do their laundry along with my own. When I mentioned feeling tired, Victoria would remind me that I wasn't paying rent, and that contributing to the household was the least I could do. "I am not asking you to do anything difficult," she said one evening, when I had struggled to carry the laundry basket upstairs. "Just basic things you do want to help, don't you?" The way she said it made me feel guilty for even being tired. At 68, my knees weren't what they used to be, and my back ached after long days of housework, but I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Then I started waking up groggy and disoriented some mornings, unable to remember going to bed. I would find myself on the living room sofa, still in my clothes from the day before, with no memory of how I had gotten there. My mouth would be dry, my head foggy, and I would feel confused for hours. "You are just adjusting to new surroundings," Victoria assured me when I expressed concern. "It is normal at your age to feel confused sometimes. The stress of losing Robert, moving to a new Placid, is a lot for anyone." She said it with such clinical authority that I began to doubt my own perceptions. Maybe I was just getting old. Maybe this was normal. That is when I noticed she had started putting my evening medications in a special dispenser. "To help you remember," she said, handing me a small plastic cup with my pills and a glass of water. "I don't want you to accidentally take too much or too little." But I had been managing my own pills for decades without issue. I took a blood pressure medication, a vitamin D supplement, and a low-dose aspirin. Nothing complicated. Nothing that would cause confusion or memory problems. I can handle my own medications, I said. Victoria's smile tightened. Eleanor, I am a healthcare professional. I know what I am doing. You have been forgetting things lately. This is just safer. The house gradually transformed around me, and I began to feel like I was disappearing along with my possessions. My comfortable reading chair, the one Robert had given me for my 60th birthday, vanished one day while I was at the grocery store. We donated it, Victoria said casually, when I asked. It didn't match our aesthetic, and it was taking up so much space. I felt a stab of pain. That chair had been my refuge, where I would read countless books, where I had nursed Michael through childhood illnesses, where Robert and I had shared quiet evenings together. But when I protested, Victoria just shrugged. It is just furniture. Eleanor, you can read on the sofa. Robert's military medals disappeared from the mantel next. His Purple Heart, his Bronze Star, his service ribbons all gone. I put them away for safekeeping, Victoria explained. They were collecting dust. Those medals are important to me, I said, feeling tears prick my eyes. They represent Robert's service to his country. They are just pieces of metal, Victoria replied. Michael doesn't even remember his father's military service. It is ancient history, but they weren't just pieces of metal to me. They were symbols of the man I had loved, the sacrifices he had made, the values he had lived by. Their absence felt like another small death. My mother's china set went to storage during a spring cleaning session. I wasn't consulted about. The delicate blue and white pattern had been in my family for 3 generations. I had planned to pass it down to Michael's children someday. It is not really practical for everyday use, Victoria said when I found the empty china cabinet. And it is so fragile. What if something broke? When I asked where my things had gone, Victoria would sigh with exaggerated patience. Eleanor, we talked about this already. Don't you remember? She would exchange glances with Michael, who would look away uncomfortably. The implication was clear. I was becoming senile, forgetful, unreliable. My protests were symptoms of cognitive decline rather than legitimate concerns. I began to feel like a ghost in their home, present, but invisible, acknowledged only when I was needed for chores or when my presence became inconvenient. During dinner, conversations would flow around me as if I weren't there. Michael would discuss his work, Victoria would talk about her patients, and I would sit silently, cutting my food into small pieces, feeling like an unwelcome guest at my own son's table. Eleanor, you are so quiet tonight, Victoria would say sometimes, her voice saccharine with false concern. Are you feeling all right? If I tried to join the conversation, to share a story or ask a question, she would interrupt or change the subject. That is nice, Eleanor. But we were talking about something else. I started eating my meals faster, just to be excused from the table sooner. I would retreat to my room, where I could think clearly, where I could remember who I used to be. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in the hallway, returning from the bathroom, when I heard voices from the kitchen. Victoria was on the phone, speaking in low, urgent tones that didn't match her usual cheerful demeanor. She is becoming a real problem, Janet. I know you went through this with your mother-in-law. How did you handle it? I froze, pressing myself against the wall, my heart beginning to race. Who was she talking about? What kind of problem? The confusion is getting worse. Victoria continued. Yesterday, she forgot where she put her glasses. And last week she left the stove on. Michael's starting to see it too. I think we need to explore our options. My blood ran cold. She was talking about me, and she was lying. I hadn't left the stove. Oni had been making soup and had turned it off before going to answer the phone. The glasses she mentioned had been moved by her, not misplaced by me. There was a pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end. Exactly. Memory care facilities aren't cheap. But if we can prove she is not competent to make her own decisions, well, someone needs to take control of her affairs before she hurts herself or others. Memory care. Incompetent. The words hit me like physical blows. They weren't discussing my well-being. They were planning to have me declared incompetent and locked away. The lawyer said we had need medical documentation. Victoria went on. But that shouldn't be hard to arrange. She is already showing signs. We just need to make sure it is properly documented. I crept back to my room, my legs shaking, my heart hammering against my ribs. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to process what I had heard. They thought I was losing my mind. They thought I was helpless. Most critically, they thought I was poor. They had no idea what Robert had left me. They had never asked about his pension, his investments, or the life insurance policy he had maintained for decades. They had never inquired about our savings, our property, our financial planning. They assumed that because I lived simply, wearing the same clothes and eating modest meals, I had nothing of value. How wrong they were. Robert had been a postal supervisor for 30 years, but he would also been a careful and methodical investor with an almost obsessive attention to detail. Every evening after dinner, he would spread financial newspapers across our kitchen table, studying market trends and company reports with the same precision he brought to his work. He had purchased his first shares of IBM stock in 1987 with money saved from overtime shifts, and from that modest beginning, he had built an empire through patience and discipline. He had studied the stock market like a scholar, reading the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and Financial World religiously. He subscribed to investment newsletters, attended free seminars at the library, and built a diversified portfolio through decades of small, consistent contributions. Every month, without fail, he had invested exactly $500 in a carefully selected mix of blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, and real estate investment trusts. He had reinvested every dividend, weathered every market downturn with stoic patience, and never once panicked during the inevitable crashes. Slow and steady wins the race, he would tell me, adjusting his reading glasses as he reviewed our monthly statements. The tortoise doesn't worry about the hare. He had bought shares in companies he understood: utilities, banks, consumer goods manufacturers. He had avoided flashy tech stocks and get-rich-quick schemes, preferring boring, reliable companies that paid steady dividends. Over the decades, those conservative choices had compounded into something extraordinary. When he died, everything transferred to me seamlessly through carefully planned estate documents. The house was paid off completely. He had made the final payment 3 years earlier, celebrating with a bottle of champagne and a quiet dinner at home. The investments were all in my name as joint owner, avoiding probate complications. The life insurance policy, which he had maintained faithfully for over 30 years, despite my occasional suggestions that we could use the premium money elsewhere, paid out $800,000 tax-free. Combined with his postal pension, Social Security survivors' benefits, and the accumulated investment portfolio that had grown to over $4 million, I was worth $4.8 million. Robert had quietly made us wealthy while living like we were just getting by. I had been living off the interest and dividends while the principal remained untouched, waiting for the right time to decide what to do with it. I had thought about giving Michael a substantial gift, maybe helping him buy a bigger house or pay for his children's education when he had them. I had considered charitable donations, travel, or simply living more comfortably. Now I knew exactly what to do with that money. The next morning, I told Victoria I needed to run some errands. "I want to visit the library," I said. "Maybe stop by the bank to check on my account." She looked up from her coffee, suddenly alert. "I could drive you," she offered, "or we could handle your banking online. It is so much easier." "I prefer to do it in person," I said. "I am old-fashioned that way." Victoria's smile tightened. "Eleanor, you have been confused lately. Are you sure you should be handling financial matters on your own?" "I am fine," I said firmly. "I have been managing my own affairs for 7 decades. I think I can handle a trip to the bank." At the library, I used one of the public computers to research elder abuse laws, conservatorship proceedings, and patient rights. What I learned terrified me. If Victoria could convince a doctor that I was incompetent, if she could gather enough documentation of my supposed decline, she could petition the court for guardianship. Once granted, she would have complete control over my finances, my medical care, and my living situation. I could be placed in a facility against my will. My assets could be sold to pay for my care. My wishes could be ignored entirely. But I also learned something else. I had rights, and I had resources. From the library, I called Patricia Morrison, Robert's estate attorney, from a payphone in the lobby. Patricia had handled our affairs for 20 years and knew every detail of our financial situation. "Eleanor," she said warmly, when I identified myself, "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. How are you managing?" "I need help," I said simply, "but not the kind you might think." We arranged to meet that afternoon at her office on LaSalle Street. Patricia was in her early 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She had been Robert's attorney since before we were married, and she had guided us through decades of financial decisions with wisdom and discretion. Her office was warm and comfortable, with leather chairs and shelves lined with law books. She poured me chamomile tea from a silver service and closed the blinds before we spoke. I told her everything: the missing belongings, the medication management, the overheard phone conversations, the gradual erosion of my independence. Patricia listened with growing concern, taking notes on a legal pad. "Eleanor," she said when I finished, "what you are describing is textbook elder abuse. They are setting you up for financial exploitation. If they succeed in getting guardianship, they will control every aspect of your life and your estate. I want to stop them," I said, "but I need to do it carefully. They think I am confused and helpless. I want to use that assumption against them." Patricia smiled grimly. "Let's give them exactly what they expect to see." Over the next 2 weeks, I began playing a role that would have won me an Academy Award. I started forgetting simple things: where I put my reading glasses, whether I had taken my morning pills, the names of television shows I had watched for years. I left cabinet doors open occasionally, and once accidentally put salt in the sugar bowl. Victoria was delighted. She documented everything in a small notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer, writing down each instance of my supposed confusion with clinical precision. "Eleanor, you left the milk out again," she would say, loud enough for Michael to hear. "It has been sitting on the counter for hours." I would look confused, apologetic. "I am sorry. I don't remember doing that. It is happening more often," she would tell Michael later. "I am really worried about her." She began speaking to me more slowly, as if I were a child, and started making all my decisions for me. "Eleanor, I think you should wear the blue sweater today," she would say. "It is warmer." Or, "Eleanor, let's have you sit in the living room while I handle the cooking." "You seem tired." I played along, acting grateful for her guidance, dependent on her wisdom. Inside, I was seething. But I kept my expression vacant, my responses slow and uncertain. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything. I had bought a small digital recorder, no bigger than a key fob, and I kept it in my pocket. I captured Victoria's conversations when she thought I couldn't hear discussions about my supposed decline, her plans for my future, her frustration with my continued presence in their home. "I cannot take much more of this," she told her friend Janet during a phone call. "She is getting worse every day. Yesterday she asked me the same question 3 times. I hadn't asked any questions 3 times, but Victoria was building a narrative, creating evidence of my supposed dementia. She scheduled a doctor's appointment for me with a geriatric psychiatrist, Dr. Hamilton, who specialized in cognitive assessments. "Just to make sure you are healthy," she explained with false concern. "At your age, it is important to stay ahead of these things." "I feel fine," I protested weakly. "I know you do," Victoria said, patting my hand. "But you haven't been yourself lately. It is just a precaution." The appointment was clearly orchestrated. Dr. Hamilton's office was in a medical building that specialized in memory care and aging services. The waiting room was filled with pamphlets about dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and long-term care options. Victoria accompanied me to the appointment, answering questions for me, describing my supposed symptoms with clinical detachment. She painted a picture of a woman in decline, someone who was becoming a danger to herself and others. Dr. Hamilton was a thin man in his 50s, with a carefully groomed beard and cold eyes. He asked me to remember word sequences, solve simple math problems, and answer questions about current events. I performed poorly on purpose, pretending to struggle with basic tasks I could do easily. "What year is it?" he asked. I hesitated, looked confused. 2023. "And what month, October? Or is it November?" He made notes on his clipboard. "Can you count backwards from 100 by sevens?" I started confidently enough, 193, 86, then pretended to lose track. 79. "I am sorry, I cannot remember." But I was careful, I answered, just poorly enough to suggest mild cognitive decline, not severe enough to be immediately institutionalized. I needed time to execute my plan. The assessment resulted in a recommendation for increased supervision and support. Victoria was thrilled. Armed with this documentation, she convinced Michael that they needed to take control of my finances for my own protection. "The doctor says Mom needs more help," she told him that evening. "She is showing signs of dementia. We need to make sure she is protected." Michael looked uncomfortable, but he didn't argue. "What do you think we should do?" "We need to get power of attorney," Victoria said, "so we can help her manage her affairs. Pay her bills, make sure she is taking her medications correctly." They presented me with legal documents one evening after dinner. Power of attorney forms, asset transfer agreements, and healthcare directives, all designed to give them complete control over my life. "This is just to help us help you," Michael explained. "Not meeting my eyes, so you don't have to worry about bills or important decisions." The documents were thick, filled with legal language that was designed to confuse and overwhelm. Victoria spread them across the dining room table like a feast. "It is really quite simple," she said, her voice honey. "Sweet, you just need to sign in a few places and we will take care of everything else." I pretended to read the documents slowly, squinting and asking for clarification on terms I understood perfectly. "What does this part mean?" I asked, pointing to a section about asset management. "It just means we will take care of your money so you don't have to think about it," Victoria explained patiently. "All those confusing bills and bank statements, and this part about healthcare decisions, that is so we can help you if you get sick," Michael said. "Make sure you get the best care." I signed the documents with a slightly shaky hand, asking if I was spelling my name correctly. They were thrilled. Victoria actually hugged me, telling me how much easier things would be now. But the documents I signed weren't the ones they had given me. Patricia had prepared identical-looking papers that actually granted me expanded legal protections and authorized her to act on my behalf in any proceedings. The real documents were safely filed with the court, along with a comprehensive report of the attempted exploitation. Meanwhile, Patricia had been busy. She had hired a private investigator to look into Victoria's background, and what they found was deeply disturbing. Victoria's real name was Veronica Chen. She had been married twice before, both times to men significantly older than herself. Both previous husbands had died within 2 years of marriage, and both had changed their wills shortly before their deaths, leaving everything to Victoria. The investigator found evidence that Victoria had been systematically isolating and drugging her previous husbands, using their altered mental states to justify taking control of their affairs. She had collected over $800,000 in life insurance payouts and inherited property worth another $400,000. Her first husband, a retired bank president named William Martinez, had died of a heart attack at age 71. The autopsy had shown high levels of digitalis in his system, but the death was ruled natural due to his pre-existing heart condition. Her second husband, a widowed construction company owner named David Kim, had died in a fall down his basement stairs. He had been found by Victoria, who claimed he had been drinking and had lost his balance. But neighbors reported that David had been acting strangely in the weeks before his death, appearing confused and disoriented. In both cases, Victoria had been the sole beneficiary of substantial life insurance policies. She had sold the properties quickly after the funerals and moved to new locations, always careful to cover her tracks. Michael wasn't her first target. He was just her latest, and I was the obstacle standing between her and his assets. Armed with this information, Patricia contacted the state's Adult Protective Services Division and the district attorney's office. They agreed to investigate, but they needed more evidence of active abuse. That is when I became a spy in my own temporary home. I started carrying the small digital recorder everywhere, capturing Victoria's conversations when she thought I couldn't hear. I recorded her talking to someone named Janet about speeding up the process and discussing which memory care facility would be cheapest. "The state-run places are horrible," Victoria said during one call. "But it is not like she will be there long. At her age, with her health issues, maybe 2 years max." I captured her telling Michael that my condition was deteriorating faster than expected, and that they needed to make arrangements soon. "She is becoming unpredictable," Victoria said. "Yesterday she asked me about her jewelry box. I told her we would put it in storage, but she didn't seem to believe me." I recorded her researching my supposed assets, frustrated that she couldn't find more substantial bank accounts. "There has to be more money somewhere," she told Janet. "He was a postal supervisor for 30 years. They didn't live like they were poor." Most damning, I recorded her on the phone with someone she called Dr. Reynolds, discussing how to adjust my medications to make me more compliant and confused. "The current dosage isn't working fast enough," Victoria said. "She is still too alert, too questioning. Can you increase it?" Dr. Reynolds turned out to be her friend from dental school, a woman who had lost her medical license years earlier for prescription fraud. She had been helping Victoria drug her previous husbands, gradually increasing their medications until they became completely dependent. The evidence was overwhelming. Victoria had been slowly poisoning me with sedatives mixed into my evening tea, creating the confusion and memory problems she then used to justify taking control of my life. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had assumed I was helpless, that I wouldn't fight back, that I would accept my fate with quiet resignation. She had forgotten that I was Robert's wife, the woman who had raised a son while her husband was deployed overseas, who had managed a household and held down a job for decades, who had survived the death of the love of her life and kept going. I wasn't just a confused old woman. I was a survivor. Patricia coordinated with law enforcement to plan Victoria's arrest. They wanted to catch her in the act of administering the drugs, so they arranged for surveillance equipment to be installed in the house while Victoria was at work. The night of the arrest, Victoria prepared my usual evening tea with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. I watched from my bedroom doorway as she moved around the kitchen, her movements sharp and efficient. She filled the electric kettle, selected my favorite mug, the one with painted violets that Robert had given me for Mother's Day years ago, and arranged everything on a small tray. But tonight was different. Tonight, I saw her reach into her purse and retrieve a small amber bottle, the kind used for prescription medications. She glanced toward the stairs, making sure I wasn't watching, then carefully unscrewed the cap and tapped several white pills into her palm. She crushed them with the back of a spoon, the powder dissolving quickly into the steaming tea. She stirred it thoroughly, tasted it to make sure the bitter medication was masked by the chamomile, then added a generous spoonful of honey. The entire process was captured on the hidden cameras that law enforcement had installed while she was at work. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I was witnessing my daughter-in-law deliberately poisoning me. She brought the tea to me in my room, along with my evening medications arranged in a small paper cup. Her smile was perfectly crafted, warm and caring. The expression of a devoted daughter-in-law tending to her elderly mother-in-law. "Here you go, Eleanor," she said with false kindness, setting the tray on my nightstand. "I made it extra strong tonight. This will help you sleep peacefully." I accepted the tea with trembling hands, playing my role as the confused, grateful old woman. "Thank you, dear. You are so thoughtful," "It is my pleasure," she replied, watching me carefully. "Drink it while it is hot. It works better that way." I lifted the mug to my lips, pretending to take a sip while barely letting the liquid touch my mouth. The bitter taste of the dissolved medication was unmistakable beneath the honey. "It is delicious," I said, setting it down. "Let me just rest my eyes for a moment." Victoria lingered, clearly waiting for the drugs to take effect. When I began to slump slightly, letting my eyelids droop, she seemed satisfied. "Sleep well, Eleanor. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." As soon as she left, I poured the entire contents of the mug down the bathroom sink, watching the poisoned tea swirl away. Then I sat on my bed and prepared for what was to come, knowing that within the hour, my nightmare would finally be over. 20 minutes later, the house was surrounded by police cars, their red and blue lights painting the walls of the suburban neighborhood in urgent colors. Victoria was in the kitchen, cleaning up from dinner and probably planning her next move, when the officers knocked on the door with the authority of justice finally arriving. When she opened it, they identified themselves and asked to speak with her. Victoria was confident and dismissive, clearly believing she was in complete control of the situation. "There must be some mistake," she said, smiling at the officers. "I am just caring for my confused mother-in-law." Her smile faded when they showed her the evidence. The recordings, the background check, the video footage of her drugging my tea, and the toxicology reports showing dangerous levels of sedatives. "In my system, you are under arrest for elder abuse, attempted murder, and financial fraud," the lead detective said as they led her away in handcuffs. Victoria's mask finally slipped. She looked at me with pure hatred, realizing that the confused old woman she had been manipulating had orchestrated her downfall. "You planned this," she hissed. "You have been pretending this whole time." I looked at her calmly, standing straight and tall for the first time in months. "I learned from the best," I said. "You taught me how to pretend to be someone I am not." Michael was devastated. He would genuinely believed Victoria loved him and that they were helping me when he learned about her previous marriages and the systematic abuse. He was horrified. "Mom, I am so sorry," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I should have protected you. I should have seen what was happening." I felt sorry for him, but I also felt something else. Disappointment. He had chosen to believe the worst about me, rather than question Victoria's narrative. He would stood by while she isolated me, controlled me, and ultimately tried to destroy me. "How could you not see it?" I asked. "How could you watch her treat me like I was nothing, and not say anything?" "I thought you were sick," he said. "I thought we were helping you. You thought it was easier to believe I was losing my mind than to admit your wife was cruel to me." That night, I packed my bags. Patricia had already arranged for me to stay at a luxury senior living community while I decided what to do next. It wasn't a nursing home, it was an independent living facility with concierge services and cultural activities. Before I left, I sat down and wrote Michael a letter explaining my decision. I told him that while I forgave him for being deceived, I couldn't forget how easily he had been willing to believe I was incompetent. I told him that trust, once broken, cannot be simply repaired with apologies. I also told him about his father's estate, all $4, $8 million of it. I explained that Robert and I had always planned to leave everything to him, but that his willingness to participate in Victoria's scheme had changed everything. Instead, I was establishing a foundation in Robert's name to help elderly victims of abuse. Michael would receive a modest inheritance enough to rebuild his life, but not enough to make him wealthy. The letter concluded with a single line: "Your father would be ashamed of the man you have become. I hope someday you will become the man he believed you could be." Victoria was sentenced to 12 years in prison for elder abuse, attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The investigation into her previous husband's deaths was reopened, and she faced additional charges in 2 other states. She would likely spend the rest of her life in prison. Michael moved back to his old apartment and started seeing a therapist to understand how he had been manipulated. He sent me letters periodically, asking for forgiveness and trying to rebuild our relationship. I read them, but I didn't respond immediately. Some wounds take time to heal. As for me, I discovered that freedom has its own particular sweetness when you have earned it through your own strength and cunning. I used part of Robert's estate to buy a small cottage in Galena, Illinois, overlooking the Mississippi River. It is peaceful there, surrounded by rolling hills and historic buildings. The cottage is small but perfect for Metwo bedrooms, a sunny kitchen, and a wraparound porch where I can sit and watch the river flow. I furnished it with pieces I chose myself, including a comfortable reading chair that reminds me of the one Victoria threw away. I hung Robert's medals on the wall in our bedroom, and I display my mother's china in a cabinet where I can see it every day. I volunteer at the local library, helping with their literacy program and organizing events for senior citizens. I tend a small garden where I grow the herbs Robert loved: basil, oregano, and rosemary. I cook for myself, simple meals that I eat when I want, without having to accommodate anyone else's schedule. I also started something new. Working with Patricia, I established a legal clinic that provides free services to elderly people facing financial abuse. We have helped dozens of seniors protect themselves from predatory family members and caregivers. The foundation has become my life's work. We provide legal assistance, safe housing, and advocacy for elderly victims of abuse. We also educate families about the warning signs of elder exploitation and how to protect their loved ones. Every morning, I wake up in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by my own choices. I make my own tea, read my own books, and decide how to spend my own time. No one questions my competence or treats me like a child. I think about Victoria sometimes, sitting in her prison cell, probably planning her next scheme for when she gets out. I think about Michael, hopefully learning to recognize manipulation and rebuilding his life with integrity. But mostly, I think about Robert and how proud he would be. He always said I was stronger than I knew, more clever than I pretended, and more valuable than I believed. It took his death and Victoria's cruelty to prove him right. The truth is, I was never the confused old woman Victoria thought she was manipulating. I was a woman who had loved, lost, and learned to protect herself. I was a woman who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon is letting others underestimate you. And when they finally realize their mistake, it is too late. 6 months after Victoria's arrest, I received a letter from Michael. He was in therapy, working to understand how he had been manipulated and why he had been so willing to believe the worst about me. He was learning about narcissistic abuse, gaslighting, and the tactics predators use to isolate their victims. "I see now that I was a victim too," he wrote, "but that doesn't excuse what I did to you. I should have protected you. And instead, I helped her hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I am working to become the man Dad would have wanted me to be." I wrote back. Finally, not to forgive him completely, but to acknowledge his efforts to change. Healing would take time, and trust would have to be rebuilt slowly. But I was willing to try. A year later, Michael came to visit me in Galena. He looked different, thinner, more serious, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He had aged in the month since Victoria's arrest, but he also seemed more genuine, more thoughtful. We sat on my porch, drinking lemonade and watching the river. He asked about my work with the foundation, and I told him about the cases we had handled, the people we had helped. He listened without interrupting, and I could see that he was trying to understand the scope of what had happened to me. "I keep thinking about things Victoria said," he told me, "things I believed without question. She told me you were forgetting things, acting confused, but I never saw it myself. I just took her word for it." "Why?" I asked. "Why did you believe her instead of me?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because it was easier," he said finally. "Because admitting that Victoria was lying would have meant admitting that I had married someone cruel, and I didn't want to see that. I hope my story helps someone else recognize the signs of elder abuse before it is too late. I hope it reminds adult children that their aging parents deserve respect, not control. And I hope it shows that wisdom often comes disguised as frailty, and that the quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous. Because sometimes the maid is actually the millionaire, and sometimes the confused old woman is the one who planned everything. The foundation continues to grow. We have helped over 200 elderly victims of abuse, and we have successfully prosecuted dozens of perpetrators. We have also educated thousands of families about the warning signs of elder exploitation. But beyond the numbers, beyond the statistics, what matters most is that we have given voice to the voiceless. We have shown that age doesn't mean helplessness, that vulnerability doesn't mean worthlessness, and that respect has no expiration date. Every day, I wake up grateful for the life I have built, for the strength I found when I needed it most, and for the opportunity to help others find their own strength. Robert would be proud, I think, and that is enough. If this story resonated with you, please share it. Too many elderly people suffer in silence while their families steal their dignity along with their assets. Subscribe to Her Light for more stories of resilience, justice, and the power of speaking truth. Remember, age is not weakness. Silence is not consent, and respect has no expiration date. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support helps us share these important stories and advocate for those who need their voices heard. Justice may be blind, but it is not deaf. And when an elder speaks, the world needs to listen.